He should not have been alive. Buried chest deep in scorching sand, wrists bound to a steel post, a U.S. Marine was left to perish in the center of Painted Mesa. No water. No radio. No chance of rescue. No one was expected to come, except 3 strays. Cast-offs. Forgotten shadows. Yet one among them, a battered German shepherd with fire glowing in his gaze, didn't see a dying soldier. He saw a mission. As the desert wind screamed and the storm tore across the land, those dogs formed a shield of flesh and willpower. This is not just survival, it is a story of faith when logic fails, of courage when no one is watching, and of loyalty that could only come from above. Before we step inside this journey, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city below. And if you believe dogs truly are angels cloaked in fur, hit that subscribe button. This tale will linger with you long after the final word. Painted Mesa carried the silence of a graveyard the morning the storm began to rise. It lay hidden in the barren stretch between Dust Ford and the jagged ridges of New Mexico's Broken Spur Range. The land stretched wide in a sea of red dust, broken stone, and sunburned sage. But that day, the desert sky darkened to an ominous orange, a color that bled across the horizon. The wind started as a whisper through the dry gullies, then grew to a howl as it gained momentum. Those who had lived in the region knew the sign well, a sandstorm was coming. But Painted Mesa no longer had listeners, it had been abandoned long ago. It belonged to the wind now. Through the screaming gusts moved 3 shapes, ghost-like against the haze. They were dogs. Their outlines blurred with blowing grit, yet their formation was exact, 1 in the lead, 2 close behind. At the front strode Duke, a 6-year-old sable German shepherd. Tall. Lean. Scarred. His tan and black coat was a mirror of the storm itself. His ears, despite the wind, stood firm, and his amber eyes were sharp, unshaken. Once trained for search and rescue, Duke had served as a military K-9 in Syria. He had lived through an ambush that claimed his handler, and afterward, he roamed free. Since that day, he had carried a kind of purpose no human could name. Duke had lost his trust in mankind, but he had not lost his instinct to protect life. On his left marched Brutus, a massive Rottweiler, 5 years of muscle and raw power. His wide chest and blocky head made him look like a boulder rolling forward, and strength rippled beneath his coat as dark as cooled lava. Brutus once belonged to a junkyard, chained and beaten for cruelty's sake. That past made him wary, quick to growl, quick to guard. But beside Duke, he softened. He obeyed the shepherd without resistance, as though he'd found the leader he had never known. To Duke's right trotted Rex, the youngest, barely 3 years old. A Doberman built for speed, with ears clipped sharp and always flicking to catch the faintest noise buried under the roar. His deep brown coat shimmered beneath the film of dust, his frame coiled and ready to spring. Rex was once left behind during a family's move, abandoned to the streets. Survival had been his only teacher. Yet even so, he had once saved a trapped child in California, sniffing the rubble until rescuers found life. Nervous but sharp, Rex now shadowed Duke step for step, loyal and wired with purpose. The trio pressed on through the storm until Duke halted. His paws dug into the sand, head angling left. He inhaled, long and deliberate. Then he froze. Beneath the surface, something stirred. Something was alive. He sniffed again, deeper. Past the scent of copper, dust, and wind, another trace lingered: sweat, fear, blood, metal. Human. Duke lowered his head, pressed his nose to the dune before him. His pack stiffened, Brutus crouched low, ready, and Rex paced, restless, ears twitching at every sound. The desert was now nothing but fire and grit, but Duke did not turn away. He dug. Sand flew from his claws, stinging his eyes, but he blinked away nothing. He struck harder, faster. Brutus joined him, dragging the earth with raw force. Rex circled the edge, watchful, tail stiff. For nearly 5 relentless minutes they worked until Brutus grunted, pausing. Something fabric tore through the surface, olive green, thick, military issue. A sleeve. Duke pressed harder. Beneath the cloth, his nose touched skin. Cold. Human. A hand. The body was buried upright, neck deep in sand, wrists bound to a post. Duke barked once, a deep sound that carried even in the storm's roar. Rex edged forward and froze, eyes wide. Brutus growled low, though no words were needed. Before them lay a man, motionless, head turned to the side, short hair crusted with grit. His uniform, torn and blood-stained, carried a nameplate, Carter L. And on the sleeve, a patch, the emblem of the U.S. Marines. Liam Carter, 34, had once been a solid wall of a man, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his steady gray eyes enough to give others courage. But now, his lips were cracked, his skin pale and blistered, his strength stripped to almost nothing. His uniform hung in tatters, blood hardened at his shoulder. Shackled at the wrist to a rusted iron stake hammered deep into the earth, he was left to be erased by the desert. Carter had been a career Marine. He'd earned decorations for valor, had seen combat overseas, and when shrapnel tore into his knee, he was reassigned to stateside logistics. His belief in duty never wavered. But the latest mission had dragged him into something darker. In New Mexico's Forgotten Flats, he had followed the wrong trail. He had spotted men unloading cargo they should never have possessed, in a place no patrol was ever supposed to go. The next thing he knew, silence swallowed the convoy. Then blackness. Then sand. Someone had wanted him to vanish. And now, he was nearly gone. Duke pressed his muzzle against the Marine's cheek, unwavering. Brutus lumbered left, using his bulk as a shield against the worst of the storm. Rex curled close to Carter's legs, vigilant eyes flicking to the horizon. The wind raged on, but none of them left. Together, they became a barrier, a living wall. Duke lowered himself at last, chest pressed to sand, paws firm against the Marine's side. He wasn't moving forward. Not until something changed. The storm roared as though it carried voices of the ancient dead. Painted Mesa dissolved into a blur of red and gold. Time dissolved. Only survival remained. And in that wasteland of grit and heat, half-buried, fading, Staff Sergeant Liam Carter clung to the edge of life. Above him stood 3 dogs, still as monuments. Duke's head bent low, ears flattened, tail rigid in the gale. He straddled Carter's chest with careful weight, guarding the fragile breath beneath him. Every so often, his muzzle dipped, tongue and teeth brushing grains of sand from the man's lips and lashes so that he could still breathe. Every move was deliberate, efficient. This was no panic. This was instinct born of training, sharpened by loss. Brutus stood like a boulder, absorbing the storm. His body shifted in steady increments, deflecting the wind's weight. A dry branch tumbled through the haze once, and reflex took him. He lunged with a snarl. Old scars, old habits. But with a glance at Duke, he settled again, lowering himself near Carter's shoulder. Rex did not stop moving. The Doberman swept a tight circle, half-steps and feints, alert to every shift in the air. His tail hung low, but his muscles thrummed like springs. Every few moments, his sharp eyes darted to Duke, waiting for confirmation before resuming his restless patrol. This wasn't chaos. It was formation. It was order. And for Duke, storms like this were already carved into memory. He remembered one years ago, not in vision but in scar-deep instinct. A mission gone wrong. His handler shouting one final word, "Go." Before the cyclone swallowed him. Duke had waited, bleeding beside a burning Humvee, ears high, heart certain. But no rescue had come. Not for him. No one came for a dog. Since that day, he had led himself. He had trusted no one to arrive. Now, he was the one who stayed. Minutes passed. The sand rose, piling over Carter's chest. Duke dug at it, scraping away the suffocating weight. Brutus rotated, deflecting the drifts. Rex darted off, barked at a scorpion, then returned, nose twitching at a blood-marked patch of soil. Their vigilance was seamless, united. And then, movement. A twitch. Carter's eyebrow shifted. A low groan slipped from his lips, carried off by the storm. But to Duke, it was enough. He pressed close, nose nearly touching the man's cracked face. His breath was shallow, his eyes fluttering under swollen lids. Slowly, one eye cracked open, a flash of light, blurred and blinding. Shadow. Gold. And then, focus. Two amber eyes staring back at him. Calm. Unyielding. Liam tried to speak, but his throat was daggers. He tried to move, but fire licked through his ribs. His vision swam, then resolved, fur, muzzle, warm breath across his cheek. Not death. Not hallucination. A guardian. A rescuer. His lips trembled. Maybe he wanted to say thank you. Maybe simply, I'm alive. But the words would not come. His voice betrayed him. So he closed his eyes again. And this time, he was not alone. Far to the west, past Painted Mesa's last ridge, the desert shimmered with static. The sandstorm roared on, but to Evan Walker, weather had never been an obstacle. At 41, his skin was bronzed by years of desert sun. Black hair streaked with gray clung close to his temples, a scar running down his chin from a knife fight in another life. His eyes, moss green, carried the look of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Once, he had been a Marine too. 2 tours in Afghanistan had left him scarred, physically, mentally, in ways words could not explain. When he came home changed. He no longer spoke much. He avoided town unless absolutely necessary. But every morning, he drove his weathered Ford pickup into the flats, checking on the skeletal relay towers left behind by a forgotten energy project. Why? He didn't know. Routine. Movement. Quiet. That was enough. But today, something broke the routine. As he neared the northwestern ridge, something caught his eye, tracks. Not human. Canine. 3 sets. Evan pulled over, crouched down, fingers brushing the deep paw prints. They were pressed hard into the sand, urgent, deliberate. And no human boot prints followed them. Who lets dogs loose out here, he muttered, wiping grit from his forehead. He straightened, gaze sweeping the swirling horizon. The storm made visibility nearly nothing, just a golden blur of dust and fury. Yet instinct tugged at him. He had been in deserts too long not to know when something was wrong. These weren't the random trails of wild strays. The spacing was exact. A formation. Evan walked to the passenger side of his truck and dragged out a faded duffel. From inside came a canteen, a collapsible shovel, a flare. He slung it over his back, set his jaw, and began to follow the paw prints into the storm. Back beneath the gale, the dogs still held the line. Duke was caked in dust now, his fur stiff, eyes stinging. Brutus dug furiously at Carter's side, snorting and shoving sand away. Rex whined once but returned to pacing, his movements frantic but precise. They were losing ground. The storm piled sand faster than they could claw it back. Then, Carter's eyes opened. A cough rattled from his throat. His chest strained against the sand. Duke pressed his muzzle against the Marine's chest, a low whine echoing from deep inside. Brutus huffed, pausing only to glance over his shoulder. Rex froze in mid-step, tail flicking once before his body went rigid. Carter shifted his head just enough to meet Duke's stare. And in that moment, he understood. They weren't waiting for rescue. They were the rescue. And they were not going to leave. Meanwhile, Evan trudged forward, wiping sweat from his brow. The storm had softened now, no longer screaming but whispering. Still, time was slipping fast, and the weight of survival pressed onto his shoulders. He knew without being told, whoever lay buried out there had little left. If he didn't move quickly, the desert would claim them for good. When Evan finally spotted them, he froze. 3 dogs forming a circle, their bodies braced against the storm, their focus centered on something in the sand. As he approached, the shepherd's head snapped toward him, amber eyes sharp, not trusting, not fearful, just measuring. Evan dropped to his knees and dug. The sand was deceptive, loose on top, but dense and compacted beneath. Every scoop brought more of Carter's battered form into view. Torn fabric, bruised flesh, injuries that spoke not of accident but of cruelty. Evan had seen too many beaten men to mistake it. This had been intentional. His gloved hand struck metal. A chain, thick and rusted, wound tight around Carter's wrist and locked to a buried stake. Whoever had left him here wanted him gone without a trace. Evan pulled his knife, chiseled sand away until the shaft emerged. Not standard issue. Crude. Probably construction rebar. You didn't just get lost out here, Marine, he muttered. Someone wanted you gone. From his duffel, he pulled a compact crowbar. With steady leverage and brute persistence, the iron moaned, then gave way. The chain clattered loose. Carter's fingers twitched faintly as tension left his body. Evan wrapped the wrist with a strip of cloth, more to keep the grit out than to heal. Then he unrolled a thermal blanket, faded green, military surplus, torn at the edge, and wrapped it snugly around Carter's shoulders. As he worked, he noticed bruises marking the Marine's shoulder, angry purple with boot print patterns stamped into the skin. Evan's jaw tightened. This was no accident. Around them, Brutus and Rex had expanded their patrol. The Rottweiler moved heavy and slow, his nose close to the sand, growls rumbling deep when he found traces on the ground. Rex darted in sharp bursts, nervous energy pulling him between rocks. Duke, however, never left Carter's side. He stood like a sentinel, golden eyes tracking Evan's every move, breath slow but fierce. Evan had seen plenty of working dogs. But this shepherd? There was something more. Intention. History. Purpose. Then Duke stiffened. One sharp bark cut through the air, commanding and urgent. Brutus froze. Rex stopped, ears twitching eastward. Evan looked up. Through the fading haze, 2 silhouettes flickered for a heartbeat. Tall. Human. And then they were gone. He rose slowly, scanning the ridge. His lips pressed thin. Then he crouched back beside Carter, checking the Marine's pulse. Still there. Still faint, but steady. He turned to Duke. You saw them too, didn't you? The shepherd's low growl was answer enough. Whoever those men were, they hadn't come back to finish the job. Not yet. They had only come to check. And that was worse. That meant planning. Strategy. Evan tightened the blanket around Carter, slid one arm beneath his shoulders, the other beneath his knees. Carter groaned, weak but alive. Brutus stalked nervously, growling low toward the ridge. Rex kept close, head low. And Duke moved forward at a steady pace, leading without a word, guiding the way out like a silent commander. The wind faded almost completely now, leaving painted Mesa cloaked in uneasy silence. The desert looked as if it were holding its breath. The storm had dropped its curtain, and hazy light broke through, stretching long shadows over the dunes. Evan Walker stood by his idling truck, one boot braced against the step rail. His face, worn and weathered, stayed tight with thought. Behind him, the 3 dogs had not relaxed. Duke stood rigid, ears high, his entire frame carved with attention. Brutus sat heavy, his massive head swiveling side to side, reading every shift in the land. Rex paced short, sharp bursts, his lean body twitching with nervous electricity. Evan's gaze dropped to the ground. The sand, now settling, revealed something new, two shallow, parallel grooves cutting across the desert crust. Tire tracks. Thick. Heavy-duty. They curved away from the burial site, leading south toward a narrow ravine locals called Dry Cut Hollow. He crouched, pulled out his phone. The screen was dim and scratched, but the camera still worked. He snapped 3 quick shots before the wind could erase the evidence. Then he marked the coordinates. Signal was dead, but he knew the device would store the data. He muttered under his breath, "Got you. Whoever you are." A faint cough broke his concentration. Evan turned. In the truck bed, wrapped in the olive blanket, Carter stirred. His face bore exhaustion carved deep, skin cracked, jaw bruised, eyes shadowed with fatigue, but when he opened them, they were awake. Faint. Glazed. But aware. Evan stepped closer, crouching by the Marine's side. "Welcome back," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Carter's lips moved. The sound was little more than a rasp. "Water." Evan raised the canteen, steadying the man as he sipped. Carter's throat worked slowly, each swallow painful. Strength was gone, but something lingered in his gaze: duty, fear, determination. "They left me," Carter croaked, voice cracking. "Left me there to die." "You're lucky," Evan said, tilting his head toward the dogs gathered beneath the truck's shade. "They found you first." Carter's swollen lips curved, barely noticeable. His eyes flicked toward the shepherd. "That one," he whispered. "Duke?" The name slipped out like memory. Evan lifted a brow. "You know him?" Carter shook his head weakly. "No, but I saw him. At the camp." That word froze Evan. "What camp?" Carter closed his eyes, summoning strength. "Old military site, bunkers, broken fence, southwest of here. They kept me there. 2 days. A cough racked him. He grimaced, breathing shallow. Evan's jaw set. He had heard rumors, a forgotten Cold War training ground out here, abandoned to dust and dares. But if Carter was right, someone had resurrected it. And not for anything good. As if confirming it, Duke growled low. Not at Evan. Not at Carter. At the horizon. His body pointed southwest, the very direction Carter had named. Brutus rose, muscles coiled, and Rex barked once, sharp, before stepping forward. "What's wrong with them?" Carter whispered. "They know," Evan answered. Duke's eyes met his, steady and commanding. Then, without hesitation, the shepherd bolted. Sand kicked up as Brutus and Rex flanked him, the three of them vanishing toward the ravine. "Hey!" Evan shouted. "Duke!" But they were already silhouettes swallowed by the glare. He cursed under his breath, dragging a hand through his graying hair. Then he glanced at Carter, still slumped in the truck bed. "Think they're heading back there?" Carter nodded weakly. "They remember." Evan's teeth clenched. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pressed down hard. "You better be worth chasing, mutt," he muttered, tires spitting sand as the truck surged forward, following the path carved by Paws. The desert offered no road, no markers. Only instinct and faint traces, occasional paw prints etched between dunes, guiding like breadcrumbs. Evan followed, the wheel jerking as the truck rattled across uneven flats. 15 minutes later, the ridge broke, and ruins appeared. Concrete shells half buried in dust. Rusted barbed wire curled like skeletal snakes. Watchtowers toppled, bleached signs warning of dangers long forgotten. The compound had the look of a graveyard of secrets. At the edge, Duke stood tall, tail rigid, ears pinned. Brutus nosed near an old drum, growling at the trace of something foul. Rex darted down the crumbled path, barking into the wind, restless as ever. Evan eased the truck into a dip, keeping it low and hidden. He pulled binoculars and scanned. The compound sat still. No shimmer of movement. No metallic glint. Nothing. Yet unease coiled in his gut. From the truck bed, Carter shifted, wincing as he tried to sit. Evan placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You stay. Let me scout." Carter didn't argue, his body couldn't. As Evan stepped forward, Duke fell in beside him. The shepherd didn't bark or whine. He simply looked toward the compound, then at Evan, then back again, walking slow, steady, as if to say, "Follow me." And Evan did. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the edge of Painted Mesa in molten gold. Silence stretched heavy across the abandoned compound, where time and dust had claimed what men had forgotten. It wasn't much, 4 shipping containers arranged in a rough semicircle, half buried in sand. Their paint, once bright blue, was now pale and peeling, their surfaces flaked with rust. Barbed wire sagged along the fence, brittle as bone, looping like a venomous snake that had long since died in place. Evan slowed to a halt, his boots crunching softly on gravel. He breathed in the scent of scorched metal and old chemicals, the stench of something unnatural beneath desert air. His eyes didn't leave the compound. "Is this it?" he asked, voice steady but low. From the truck, Carter leaned forward, jaw tight, his movements slow with pain. He scanned the broken skyline through the windshield. "That's it," he whispered hoarsely. "That's where they kept me." Hours of rest and water had given him back some color. The swelling in his face had dulled, though bruises bloomed darker across his arms and ribs. His eyes, however, had sharpened again. No longer clouded by fever, they carried a soldier's clarity. Evan retrieved a camera and flashlight from the glove box. He stepped out first. Duke padded beside him, nose lifted to the wind, tail rigid. Brutus lumbered out after, solid and silent, while Rex darted ahead, weaving like a shadow already searching. The containers loomed closer, doors sealed with rusted locks. Time and sand had corroded them badly, some hanging askew on their hinges. One door sagged open just enough to reveal darkness within. Evan reached for the handle, but Carter's voice rasped from behind. "Step back. Brutus will open it faster." Evan glanced over his shoulder, one brow lifting. But he obeyed, stepping aside. Brutus lumbered forward, muscles rippling under his coat. A scar curled down his right shoulder, a reminder of battles long endured. He pressed his bulk against the steel door, growled deep, then drove his weight forward. The metal shrieked in protest, then snapped inward, the sound echoing across the hollow. Inside was shadow. Dust. Silence. Rex slipped in first, low and fast, nose twitching. After a moment, he barked twice, sharp, but not alarmed. Alert. Evan entered next. The smell struck him immediately, old gasoline, rust, dried blood. The floor was compacted dirt, hard as stone. Chains rattled softly in the breeze seeping through thin slits of light. The walls bore crude loops of welded steel, and in the far corner, a stained mattress lay crumpled, forgotten, curling in on itself. Carter's face drained. His hand gripped the side of the truck to steady himself. "I was chained there," he whispered, pointing at the wall. His voice cracked. "But I wasn't the only one." Evan's flashlight swept across the interior. More loops. Dark stains clotted below them. Scratches scored the dirt near the door, some shallow, some deep. Fingernails. Boot soles. Desperation etched into the floor. Evan crouched, pulling his phone to snap pictures of every chain, every rusted loop, every stain. "This wasn't shelter," he muttered. "This was a cell." Carter shook his head faintly. "Not just a prison. A message." In the silence, Duke moved to the far corner. His nose pressed against the dirt. He sniffed, then began digging with urgent, deliberate strokes. His claws scraped hard soil until they struck something solid. Evan joined him, crouching low, helping scrape the soil away. Together, they unearthed a canvas satchel, edges frayed, corners decayed. Military issue. Small, designed for rations or ammo. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded American flag patch, stiff with time. Beneath it, a tarnished dog tag, chain snapped. Evan lifted it into the light. Keller, M.J. Branch, USMC. Blood type, O+. Carter's jaw tightened. His head shook faintly. I don't know him. But he's one of ours. Evan sifted through the rest. A single spent casing. A coin. A square of cloth, darkly stained. No wallet. No ID. Nothing to say who Keller had been, only that he had been here, and had not left. Evan's throat tightened. He looked at Duke, whose amber eyes seemed almost too knowing. How many didn't make it out, he whispered. The shepherd gave no answer, only stood, solemn and unblinking. They checked the other containers. One stood empty. Another brimmed with rusted barrels and old toolboxes. The last, however, caught Evan's attention. The paint was fresher. The padlock gleamed under the sun. Too new. Evan snapped a quick photo, then stepped back. We're not touching that until backup arrives, he said firmly. You think they're still using it? Carter asked, voice hoarse. Evan's eyes cut to the tire tracks outside. Fresh. Barely dusted over. Someone's been here recently. Maybe still is. The wind had gone still again. The desert seemed to lean in, waiting. Long shadows stretched across the container camp as the sun slid lower. Evan checked his phone. No service. Of course. In the truck's passenger seat, Carter sat weak but upright, clutching the dog tag they'd uncovered. Outside, Duke paced slow and steady, golden eyes scanning both the dirt path and the canyon mouth beyond. Let's move, Carter murmured. We've got enough. Evan nodded. He whistled low. Brutus bounded from between containers, Rex darted out quick and sharp, both clambering back toward the truck. Duke lingered, ears perked, growl low in his chest. Evan followed his stare. Gravel crunched. From beyond the canyon's lip, headlights snapped on. Two trucks rolled forward, matte black, dust-coated, unmarked. Their engines snarled as they crawled closer, cutting off the only exit. Doors slammed. Four men stepped out. Khaki fatigues. Mirrored glasses. Skin roughened by the sun. Hunters, not of animals. The tallest stepped forward. Hawk-nosed, lips thin, hair pulled back tight. A tattoo marked his forearm, a bullet crossing a playing card. Well, he drawled, venom lacing his tone, look what the storm spit back. His gaze skipped over Evan, locking on Carter. A grin spread. Didn't expect to see you breathing, Marine. Carter's hand clenched against the dash. His voice cracked with recognition. Jake Strickland, he muttered. One of them. Jake smirked wider. You weren't meant to crawl out. Guess we'll have to fix that. Evan shifted subtly, planting himself between Carter and the men. His instincts screamed. His hands itched toward the crowbar tucked by his seat. But he held steady, muscles coiled. Behind him, Brutus rumbled, a growl that shook deep in his chest. Rex stood stiff on the truck bed, teeth bared. And Duke stepped forward. Calm. Deliberate. A commander preparing for battle. His growl was not threat. It was promise. Jake chuckled. Nice mutt. Duke lunged. The German shepherd struck like a bullet fired from silence. In an instant, Duke closed the gap, teeth clamping down on Jake Strickland's forearm, the same arm that held a pistol. The weapon barked once, the shot screaming harmlessly into the sky before it tumbled from his grasp. Jake roared in pain, staggering backward as Duke twisted, jaws locked with surgical precision. Chaos exploded. The second man yanked his rifle up, but Brutus hit him like a wrecking ball. The Rottweiler's full weight slammed into his ribs, the crack audible even through the desert air. The man wheezed, breath ripped from his lungs as he crumpled under the crushing force. Rex leapt from the truck bed, a streak of muscle and teeth. He latched onto the third man's leg, jaws tearing fabric, dragging him down hard. The mercenary kicked wildly, boots smashing into Rex's ribs, but the Doberman only growled deeper, refusing to release. The fourth man fumbled with the strap of his rifle. Too slow. Evan lunged, scooping the fallen pistol from the dust. His training snapped awake. He leveled the weapon and fired a single shot into the ground at the man's feet. Sand exploded upward. Back. Evan barked, his voice a whip of command. The man froze, weapon half raised, eyes wide. Jake cursed, blood dripping down his arm as Duke finally released. The shepherd stood firm, muzzle red, teeth bared in a snarl that carried no hesitation. Evan didn't hesitate either. He pivoted, yanking open the truck door. "We're leaving," he snapped. He shoved Carter down against the seat, shielding him from view, then vaulted behind the wheel. "Go, go, go." Carter rasped, his voice weak but urgent. The dogs moved like shadows on command. Duke leapt into the bed first, eyes still locked on Jake. Brutus broke away from the groaning man he'd flattened and bounded into the truck's rear. Rex released his grip last, snarling until the mercenary collapsed to his knees. Then he sprang back, claws scraping steel as he landed beside his pack. Evan slammed the truck into reverse. Gravel screamed under the tires as the vehicle jerked back, fishtailing in the sand. He twisted the wheel, forcing the truck between the two black pickups. One mirror sheared off with a snap. A mercenary dove aside just in time, shouting curses drowned by the roar of the engine. Within seconds, they tore free of the canyon mouth. The desert opened wide ahead, horizon glowing faint under the last light. No gunfire followed. Only the pounding of the engine, Carter's ragged breathing, and the growl of dogs braced against the bed. Evan's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Who the hell were they? He demanded, eyes darting between the rear view and the road. Mercenaries, Carter croaked, spitting blood into a crumpled rag. Paid to bury secrets. Evan's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed on the endless desert ahead. Then maybe it's time someone started digging them up. The truck barreled on, swallowed by nightfall. Dawn came slow, bleeding across the ridges of painted Mesa in ribbons of crimson and gold. The desert, so violent the day before, now stretched quiet and reverent, as though mourning its own cruelty. At Dustford Hospital, a squat adobe building warmed by sunlight and grit, Liam Carter lay propped in a bed near an open window. A breeze carried the faint scent of sage and earth. His right arm was bandaged. His shoulder, swollen and stitched, ached with every breath, but he was alive. His eyes, blue and restless, stared beyond the shutters at the rising light. Beside him sat Nurse June Morales, a tall woman in her 50s, hair tied tight, eyes calm but marked by the weight of men she had nursed before. Once, she had worked in war zones. Loss had left its lines on her face, but compassion still softened her voice. She checked his chart without looking up. "You're lucky you're breathing," she said. Carter gave a faint smile, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't luck. It was teeth, muscle, and 4 legs. Outside the hospital entrance, Evan leaned against his battered truck. Dirt clung to his clothes, his knuckles scraped raw. He hadn't slept, but the heaviness that had shadowed him for years, guilt, silence, failure, seemed lighter now, if only slightly. At his feet, Duke sat tall, ears twitching at every sound. Brutus sprawled on the pavement, chest rising in deep, steady breaths. Rex paced in tight circles, restless as always, nose flicking to every shift of air. News had spread quickly, of the buried Marine, the abandoned compound, the firefight in the canyon. Evan had turned over every photo, every GPS tag, every scrap of evidence to the sheriff. By sunset, state law enforcement had swarmed Dry-Cut Hollow. Jake Strickland and his men had been cornered before they even realized they were being hunted. The desert that had hidden them for years no longer kept their secrets. Deputy Carla Boone, broad-shouldered with eyes sharp as glass, slid the case file across her desk when Evan stopped by the sheriff's office. "This is enough to lock them down for good," she said. Evan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." His gaze shifted to the window, where 3 dogs waited. "You owe them." By the next morning, Dustford's town square buzzed with chatter. News traveled fast in places like this, quicker than the wind that carried dust across the mesas. People spoke in low voices, shaking their heads, their words mingling like wildfire rumors. A Marine left for dead. A forgotten compound. 3 strays who fought like soldiers. At the small veterinary clinic, Duke stood still while Dr. Carla Eno ran careful hands along his legs. She was a woman in her 30s with a calm presence, her brown eyes soft but keen. "No fractures," she murmured, tracing a scar across his flank. "But this one has seen things." She smiled faintly, scratching his ear. "There's fire in him." Brutus limped slightly on one paw, but it was nothing serious. Rex had a shallow cut along his ribs, which Carla cleaned and dressed with gentle precision. "They fight like trained dogs," she said, glancing at Evan. "But what I see in them, it's instinct. Loyalty." Evan nodded, silent. He didn't need to explain. The dogs spoke for themselves. When he returned to the hospital later that day, Carter was sitting up, a plate of scrambled eggs before him. He ate slowly, his face pale but steadier now. "You're a hard man to kill," Evan remarked, leaning against the doorway. Carter's lips curved faintly. "Tell me about it." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of hospital life filling the space. Then Carter looked up, his gaze shifting toward the window where Duke, Brutus, and Rex sprawled in the sunlight. "What happens to them?" he asked quietly. "They stay," Evan said simply. "If they'll have me." And so it began. Papers were signed. Vaccinations given. Collar tags etched with names. Duke. Brutus. Rex. 3 strays transformed into guardians with a home. Evans Ranch, 10 miles north of Dustford, had stood empty for years. Once it was a family property, but after his father's death it had fallen into disuse, the barn sagging, the porch dust-coated. Now, with paws pattering across wood and barks echoing against the hills, the place lived again. The dogs adapted quickly. Brutus claimed the porch as his territory, sprawling across it like a living shield. Rex scaled the barn roof, to the confusion of everyone, keeping watch from above. And Duke was everywhere. Moving silent, vigilant, more sentinel than pet. Neighbors began to stop by. Children begged to see the desert heroes, and for the first time in years, Evan found himself opening his gate willingly. He even stood at the fence line some evenings, watching the sun bleed across the mesa with Duke sitting tall at his side. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of rose, Carter came to visit. He walked slowly with a cane, his body still healing, but his eyes were sharp, clearer than they had been since the sandstorm. He wore jeans, boots, and a faded Marine sweatshirt. "They're still patrolling?" he asked, nodding toward the dogs pacing the property. Evan smirked faintly. "Every morning. Every evening. No orders needed." Carter crouched stiffly near Duke. The shepherd stepped forward, sniffed him once, then lowered his chin onto the Marine's knee. Carter's hand trembled slightly as he rested it on the dog's head. "You saved my life," he whispered. Duke didn't blink. His eyes fixed on the horizon, amber and steady, as if already watching for the next danger. The next morning, Painted Mesa glowed crimson under the first touch of dawn. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and cactus blossoms across the ranch. Brutus stretched on the porch, yawning wide. Rex darted along the fence line, chasing shadows. And Duke climbed the sand ridge at the property's edge. He stood tall, ears sharp, tail raised like a banner. From that height, he could see the whole desert, the trails, the roads, the horizon itself. His breath fogged slightly in the cool air, and the wind tugged gently at his fur. He was not barking. He was not moving. He was guarding. Waiting. Watching. A leader doesn't always need to speak. Sometimes, he simply stands. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes, he sends them with paws, scars, and purpose. In Painted Mesa, where silence often buried hope, 3 forgotten dogs had become a miracle in motion. They had not chosen to be heroes. They had only answered a call whispered by heaven. This story reminds us that in life's harshest deserts, whether physical or within the heart, we are never truly alone. Help can come from the most unexpected of places, carried not by coincidence, but by grace. If you believe in second chances, in prayers answered quietly, in love that speaks without words, then this story was meant for you. Drop an amen in the comments if you believe God's protection comes in many forms. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss stories of redemption, faith, and unseen miracles walking among us. May the Lord bless you, and keep you. The Mesa wore its silence differently now. Not as a graveyard, but as a witness. Where once the wind had howled mercilessly, now it whispered softly over dunes, as though the desert itself respected what had taken place. At Dust Ford, the story of the Marine and the 3 dogs spread far beyond town lines. Travelers passing through stopped to ask questions, locals retold the events with pride, and children pretended to be Duke, Brutus, or Rex as they chased each other in play. The names of the dogs carried weight, not as pets, but as saviors. Carter, still recovering, received visitors daily. Some came out of respect for his service, others just to glimpse the man who had crawled back from the edge with nothing but grit, faith, and a pack of strays. He never took full credit. I didn't walk out alone, he would remind them. They brought me through. Evan kept mostly to himself, though his role could not be hidden. The sheriff's office credited his evidence for breaking Strickland's crew apart, but he deflected attention. Whenever someone thanked him, he only tilted his head toward the dogs. They're the ones who don't quit, he'd say. At the ranch, the rhythm of life shifted. Brutus lounged heavy on the porch, content at last with a place that asked nothing but his presence. Rex darted and climbed, chasing everything from barn swallows to his own shadow, earning laughter from the neighbors' children who came to visit. And Duke, the sentinel, never ceased his patrol. Morning and night, he stood tall at the ridge, amber eyes always scanning. One evening, Carter returned again. His body still bore scars, his knee stiff, but he walked straighter now, his cane tapping less with each step. Evan met him at the fence. Neither man spoke much at first, they didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. Carter glanced toward Duke, who sat watching the horizon. You ever think he's still on duty? Evan's mouth curved faintly. I think he never clocked out. Carter chuckled softly, then grew quiet. His hand brushed over the dog tag he now wore around his neck, not his own, but Keller's, recovered from the compound. There are others, he said quietly. Others who didn't make it back. Evan nodded slowly. And now there's proof. Strickland and men like him don't get to keep secrets buried forever. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred sage across the hills. Then Carter crouched with a faint wince. Duke stepped forward, pressing his muzzle gently against the Marine's chest. Carter closed his eyes. "Guess I owe you more than I can pay, old boy." Duke didn't answer, he never did. He simply leaned into the touch, his gaze still fixed outward, watching, waiting. The days turned to weeks. The scars of Painted Mesa remained, but hope had taken root in the desert. The ranch came alive with visitors. Evan, once a man lost in silence, found himself listening to children's laughter echoing across his land. He didn't always join in, but he didn't close the gate anymore either. Every dawn, Duke climbed the ridge. The first light painted his fur in fire, his stance tall and proud. He was not merely keeping watch over land. He was guarding something deeper, proof that loyalty survives, that courage endures, that angels sometimes come not with wings, but with paws and scars. And maybe, just maybe, with second chances. This story is more than survival. It is a reminder that even when we are buried by life's storms, even when hope feels lost beneath the sand, help can arrive in forms we never expect. Not coincidence. Not chance. Grace. If you believe in redemption, in God's unseen hand guiding even the smallest of lives, then this story was written for you. Say Amen in the comments if you know that His protection comes in many shapes. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that miracles still walk among us. And subscribe, so you never miss the tales of faith, loyalty, and the unseen guardian standing beside us. May God bless you, and keep you always.